one of the number one things that you've got to combat, to be able to go back to that subcontractor and say, no, here it is. This is where I sent it to you. You document the transmittals, you document when you give them the subcontracts, you document everything that goes to that subcontractor so that they can't play Sergeant Schultz on you. So
We've had them claim they had no idea there was a project schedule, that they'd never seen the overall project schedule, no idea they had a completion date, no idea that what their scope of work included. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, it really is, there's no limit to the creativity of how they'll try to get out from under something. So it's, you know, when you put somebody in a corner, they're going to engage in this kind of activity. So the solution is a lot of what we talked about on the front end today about making sure that scope of work is clearly defined. Then it's these transmittals. Now, I don't care if you do it through emails. I mean, that's generally the accepted way of doing it. But you need some method for keeping the emails. And my hope was that your software system started to capture that. Many of my clients have that ability where this, you know, when they're emailing, whatever the email transmittals are all being captured within their software system. We don't know yet how yours works. But if it does do that, that is obviously what you want to do. In addition to transmittals, for major things that you're talking to them about, such as met about this scope of work that's not being done properly, you need your superintendents documenting that in daily reports. Okay? And if it's going further than that, if it's getting to the point where, you know, it's going to be a bigger problem, then we would expect to see that as the project managers, you are putting that into the weekly project meetings. So as part of putting together the agenda and the status of what's actually going on your job, put down what's actually going on your job. Don't just sugarcoat it. I mean, you got to write down, we're resolving this issue. Sub agreed, understands that I've got to have its work complete by this date because I have successive subs coming in after that. That's documented in, you know, a weekly meeting minute sent out to the sub, and they know that, you know, they can't claim that they had no idea this was happening. Questions about that? We're not trying to add to your documentation, we're trying to make your documentation more effective. And I think that that is something I want you guys to appreciate. We get how busy you are. We understand how many projects you run a year. We understand how difficult it is to keep up with all of this. So we're not trying to say document for document's sake. We're trying to give you some type of checklist on how to have more effective documentation. And done that way, you might actually have less need to document if you're more effective at doing it.
Well, and also, I think it comes out of our experience on the back end when the project has come down into the ditch. I mean, this is the stuff we asked for. And at the end of the day, you either have a really tough time pulling it together and it's more work for you on the back end, or you've done it. And you say, nope, here's how it is, here's how the project lays out, and you make our job more efficient, you make your job more efficient, and you spend less time fighting on the back end. And I think that's the ultimate goal.
First thing any subcontractor lawyer is going to request is a full copy of your daily reports. They will then say that your daily reports tell the entire story of everything there is to know on the project because they are, by definition, daily, right? We all know that daily reports, depending on that superintendent, depending on the project manager, can be incredibly sketchy, vastly incomplete. Well, that's only to the subcontractor's advantage. He's like, see, no problem. If it was a problem, it'd be all over this daily report. This guy's not saying anything about it. Well, he's not saying anything about it because he's putting out 100 other fires. But all of a sudden, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and the picture is the daily report with nothing on it. And now we're having to scramble defensively and argue around daily reports that are incomplete, okay? So, as the PM, who's aware, because you're probably talking to superintendents about what's going on with various trades, it's your job to make sure the superintendent is actually putting it down. Now, again, I don't know, I mean, John, you can weigh in on this, but The hope is that your software is facilitating this, that your daily reports have gone to some kind of electronic nature where they're able to write it out, you know, more contemporaneous and it's easier to do.
Yeah, they've been, I mean, we've had the electronic version, and this newer software, I think, is hopefully making it easier on the guys in the field.
Right.
But it does, you know, it captures scope of work, manpower, photos, and should make it easier for them to document what's happening or not.
What about impact on schedule, successive trades, ability to insert photos?
Yeah, you can insert photos, weather will, you know, it's got a location for weather. As far as successive trades, that's gonna be in the description input by the superintendent.
All right. So there's like a box where they can.
For the way ours works is, ABC Contracting had 5 men on the job site, here's the equipment they had, here's what they worked on today, or they're falling behind, and there, below there is another section for phone calls. So I called the ABC office, told them that we needed X, Y, and Z, and that they're falling behind, or whatever. So that is a narrative from the superintendent in there, which should be backed up by the PMs if they're aware that somebody's falling behind. Hey, guys, I was out there today, make sure you get this into your daily report that we talked to the superintendent or the foreman for this other company.
If you're writing emails or texting somebody about some issue on the job, you need to be making sure that's documented in the daily reports.
The daily report also has a section that says, are there delays on the job? Yes or no, check box. And if you check yes, then you have to put a description for what delays there are on that project. So if there's continuous delays, that box needs to be checked every single day by the superintendent. And then the PMs need to be following up with them on that.
Well, I guarantee the subs know that. And if they think they're getting delayed by something, then they're exactly doing that. Because I've read too many daily reports from subcontractors that are like, we're on the 21st day of delay, we're on the 22nd day of delay, we're on the 23rd day of delay, right? So that's how they operate, and that's how they're trained. So appreciate that you need to rebut them. Okay.
So that we've gone ahead, we've talked about transmittals and documentation of trade coordination and schedule. We've mentioned earlier about having weekly subcontractor meetings. Important message take home from there is at the end of those meetings, there should be minutes that are generated and circulated to the subcontractors documenting what you talked about and what the subcontractors agreed to in those meetings in terms of schedule, dates they can turn over, you know, portions of their work, and commitments that they made in those meetings, so that you can enforce those against the subcontractor. And you can't, again, pull a Sergeant Schultz and say, I don't know anything about that. I never told you I committed to, you know, complete the stair tower by, you know, next week. And that's important.
Yeah, I think the look-ahead scheduling, which you guys are probably doing, needs to be documented at some level so that they understand that you're relying on those commitments, that they're gonna meet that, and that you're gonna schedule follow-on trades based on that. Any questions on what we've covered so far? All right, so it looks like we're getting to decisions. There are two types of mini decisions, I guess, but two major ones that we want to address. One is RFIs, architect decisions, clarifications. This is your means by which, if you have questions about plans and specifications, your approach has got to be to fully and timely address that with the design side. And that's the RFI process. And you can't just send an RFI and fail to follow up on it. You got to send it, keep bird dogging it to get to conclusion, and if it starts to document or starts to create delays in terms of the failure of the architect to get back, it needs to be documented. Because oftentimes these architects produce incomplete plans and specifications. I think it's even more prevalent today. And write this down. If you have some issue on your job related to waterproofing, whether it is the curtain wall, whether it is the storefront window, whether it is how end dams are going to interface, anything related to waterproofing, and you can just quote me on this, document the living hell out of it with the architect as to what the solution is. Because all architects believe that you're in the waterproofing business. They think if I put a generic waterproofing detail on this set of plans, and if we were to put these plans on the wall and they were, just plan by plan, and we get all the way over here to a plan, right? But there's some generic waterproofing detail over here that somehow that extends all the way across those plans. That's what you guys have to scrub. Every single owner contract that you sign contains language to the effect, certainly in the AIA, that says that you have reviewed the plans and specs for purposes of inconsistencies, and that you basically have accepted what's in those plans unless you've raised your hand otherwise. How did we raise our hand? RFI. Okay? And this is not just with the design team. I mean, you need to sit down with this, whoever's doing the waterproofing or related type work with your sub and make sure they fully understand it, that their questions have been presented, okay? You guys build periodically in Florida, I guess, right?
Yes, sir.
I think it's physically impossible to build something watertight in Florida, so you can consider whether you want to bake into those projects a waterproofing consultant, preferably on the owner's side. Huge issue. There's any doubt about that. I mean, waterproofing is one of the main areas of litigation for a reason. It's just hard to waterproof stuff. I mean, people take it for granted. There's little things that can cause problems.
To what Kevin said, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, even though we've got that provision within the plan, or within the contract that states that we've reviewed the plans and specs, we do have another provision within contracts typically that allows for discovery, but we have to advise within a certain amount of time. That's usually, I believe, 7 days to 10 days, something like that. So just because you don't find something until 2 or 3 months into the job doesn't mean it's too late. You just have to notify the owner and the architect in a timely fashion.
And that is when stuff is likely to happen, because until they get out there, because they're not doing mock-ups at the time of doing their, they don't do mock-ups when they do this. And when they start getting out there and they start looking at the interface of how things are going on, they're gonna start raising questions. And then the clock is ticking. You better get all over it in terms of the right documentation. Thought you had something.
No, that was it.
Good?
So the next major part of your subcontract would be changes, how we administer changes in the work under the subcontract. What you've got to know there is the only person who has authority to approve a change is the project manager. Your superintendent cannot approve a change in the field. It's got to be on a written change order approved by the project manager. You'll get subcontractors all the time saying, the superintendent told me to do the work. It's not a change unless the project manager approves and authorizes the change in record.
Let's make sure we get the terminology correct. I think you guys use COPs or change order proposals. Is that right?
Depends on the client.
Okay. So what's the verbiage for something that is a request for a change but is not yet a change order?
It's all
Generally,
pending
COP.
change orders now for the new system.
PCO, pending change order.
Right. That's where it gets confusing, okay? And I want to undo the confusion. A change order is a document that is signed by the owner, sometimes the architect, and by the general contractor that says what the change is. That becomes a contract document. Everything else is literally a claim. Now, whether it has risen to the level of a disputed claim or not, it nonetheless has to be tracked. So you want to come up with some approach of pending change orders or change order requests or change order proposals, whatever it is, that is tracking when that happened, what's gone on with it, whether you need to get to the point of calling it a disputed claim or not. Because the fact is that while we call it a change order log here, the vast majority of what's on a change order log, particularly on the subcontractor side, are claims. They're change order requests, they're change order proposals. They're not actually change orders. And you need to track them as such. It even gets more confusing when they start calling it, you got change order number 1 and change order request 1. Except change order request 1 doesn't relate to change order 1. So all of it becomes diabolical in terms of how they use these terms. So you got to simplify it, however you do it. My suggestion, change orders ought to exist in their own universe, either on a separate document, but certainly in a separate section if you're going to use a common document. Everything else, whether it's a change order request, COP, whatever it is, separate area, okay? because the bulk of it is gonna be down there. And all of these waiver issues, all of these notice issues that are gonna exist, that either you're gonna enforce against subs, or that are gonna yield themselves to a contractor's decision, which we're gonna talk about in a second, all of that exists in that realm, not in the change order. Now, the only danger with change orders is, if you're gonna sign a change order, make sure you read what it says, because if the change order is about to resolve everything related to a scope of work, and you think something is still outstanding, you might not wanna sign that change order, because you're about to waive it. Questions on that?
I think one of the issues that John raised earlier is what's going on when you guys are stymied on a change order request, PCO, at the end of the job. You know that the price is overinflated, you dispute it. How do you resolve that? How do you break the logjam at that point in time in the project, as opposed to letting it linger till the end of the project when you have 8 or 9 of those that cost a whole lot more money? And the answer there is part of your contractor's decision language. You can issue a contractor's decision on the change order, move it to the claim realm, and then they have, the subcontractor's right is to appeal that contractor's decision and pursue the dispute resolution to hopefully resolve the claim. But ultimately, I think that's one of the ways that we're gonna talk about for how you use that subcontract effectively to close out the job and close out those particular change items.
Can I see a show of hands as to who has done a contractor's decision just higher up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So generally, I already know the 5 hands because everybody who's ever done a contractor's decision generally reaches out to me to look at the language for a contractor's decision, okay? All a contractor's decision is a way to streamline the dispute resolution process over an issue, okay? Generally, it's a big issue. Like a sub says that I'm entitled to 200 grand because this wasn't in my scope of work, right? So here's my change order request. And you go back, you look at the plans, and you're like, well, it's right here in the plans. I'd be happy to give you a clouded version of the plans that shows you this is in your scope of work. And the sub's like, I disagree, right? Because they're in the disagreement business. I want my 200 grand. And then you say, okay, well, we've looked at it, we've evaluated it, we hear your position. Here's our contractor's decision saying that this was in your original scope of work, therefore you're not entitled to be paid, okay? That's what it is. It's as simple as that. We've looked at it, here's how we're resolving this issue. Then what happens? One of 2 things. The sub can initiate an arbitration within 30 days, which is just accelerating the dispute process to challenge your decision. Or what we hope is the sub does nothing. If the sub does nothing, then we win. Because what the language says is, if you fail to appeal the contractor's decision within 30 days by initiating an arbitration, you have accepted that decision, it is now conclusively binding. It takes the $200,000 change order request issue off the table. Now, it doesn't mean it's gone away forever, because subs will inevitably try to revisit that, and sometimes we have to go enforce that. We've done that many times on Benning's behalf. But that's all it is a way to basically take an issue, carve it out of the construction process to a faster dispute resolution, and then it's either going to get resolved by an arbitration, or it's going to get resolved by the sub doing nothing. I hope I've made that clear, because I think sometimes contractor's decision is one of those areas that people go, woo, wait a minute, what is that, what's that about? Sounds daunting. It isn't something to undertake lightly. I mean, obviously you want, you don't want to be issuing a contractor's decision every other day, but it is something, if you get to that level on a significant issue, that we've used effectively. Make sense, John?
Yep.
Apparently it made sense to my phone too, since it's telling me that I'm just about done with my portion of the program and Chad's going to run the rest. So I want to make sure I've answered any other questions, not just related to what I've talked about, but anything else I can answer in the next 5 minutes or so.
One other thing, if I might. based off of both what Kevin and Chad were talking about with change orders, but not just change orders, one of the big provisions that we've got in our contract is that the subs are held to the provisions of the owner contract. Okay, sometimes you can take a lot of argument out of a sub by stating, for example, we got a sub right now, he wants 30% profit, he's throwing unreasonable numbers out there. Well, what does the owner contract? Ours doesn't give specific amounts that we're gonna pay for, but does the owner's contract that we're tied to, and they are then tied to, say they cannot charge anything more than 10% profit, and that they have to have written payroll records given to us and material receipts given to us, okay? What does it state? You can tie it right back to that. Kevin, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
No, I think the only thing I would expand on that is that in the relationship business which you're in, I think subcontractors lose sight of something. They act like oftentimes they entered into the contract with the general contractor, as though the reason somehow that they have this relationship is all because of the general contractor. It's true that the contract is between them and the general contractor, but really the role of the general contractor is providing them with an opportunity that they otherwise would not have had to perform work on a project on behalf of an owner that they otherwise wouldn't be able to work for. So the relationship is not, they never see it that way. They never get that what they did was they entered into some kind of collaboration with the general contractor who facilitated this work, brought this group together to do the work on behalf of the owner. Which means, if you have a change because the plans are screwed up, well, we didn't draft the plans. We got the same problem, right? We're in the same boat together. If the plans are screwed up, I don't know how many times I have to tell a subcontractor, please help me help you. Would you like to give me the information so I can go make this argument, or do you just want to keep arguing about what the GC should do? Because the GC didn't do anything. The GC doesn't have any knowledge of your means and methods, or how you went about doing this, or how you fabricated that. And if you think you did something, how about sharing that with the rest of the class? So I can take that to an owner and make a presentation that's effective. Because otherwise, what you get from the owner is, I got nothing here. I got no reason to pay for this because there's no documentation of additional work, no documentation of additional costs, right? So whatever you can do to facilitate that understanding with whoever's reasonable in the sub-trailer that has some decision-making process, to say, guys, you're not helping me with this. You're not allowing me to move forward. You're not giving me the information that I need to go up to the real decision maker who's always the owner, right? Now, I'm not talking about GC-directed changes. There are some of those, right? Let's just take that off the table for a second. I'm talking about the majority of changes in jobs happen because of something that the owner has control over. Is it a classified job? Is it an unclassified job? Is that something anybody in this room thinks that GC decides? No. We all know that the owner decides that, right? And it's going to flow down to your grading contractor based on the implications of that decision, which means, did the general contractor conduct some geotechnical report investigation? No. The sub is expected to have done that, right? So again, I think that gets to the heart of it, right? I don't like to hide the ball with the owner contract. You know, I mean, I would invite every sub, you need to read this thing, you're bound by it. You need to know what this says, you're bound by it. There's no reason for that. Now, what we give them is a redacted copy. We don't give them the financial terms and all that stuff, but every one of your jobs should have a redacted copy of the owner contract readily available to give to a subcontractor and invite them affirmatively to come take a look at it so they understand what they are doing. Because if they don't, it really only harms your job, if you think about it. I mean, if you're allowing an uneducated sub to get out there on your job who thinks he's doing one scope of work, he's really doing another, your job isn't going to go well. I mean, even if you make money off that job because you manage to cram down on the sub, which I would submit is unlikely, because if you have a problem sub, by definition, you're about to spend more money on your job than you intended to spend. So those kinds of communications, I think, are necessary. I don't know if I answered your question or went off on another speech.
No, I think it was good. Thank you.
But I think that's For all of what, the lawyer jokes, many of which are well earned, particularly in Chad's case, for all of that about how difficult we make this, it really isn't. If you look at what the contract is intended to do, it's intended to do two things. Effective communication, number one. What are we doing as a group? I mean, that should be clear. And number two is, if we aren't communicating or we have some issue, how can we address that, move forward in a positive way that's meaningful, okay? Again, I'm just gonna close with this. I mean, you have subs that you're at risk of piracy on. You have, the number of jobs in the southeast is insane. They're all spread out, and they're basically working like temp forces, right? It's like, they don't want to staff up because they know they'll have to fire them if there's a recession. So it's this giant temp force going on out there. So the more you can monitor and know who's out there, probably the biggest risk you face today. Anything else before I take off? Thank you very much for having me. Chad will lead you the rest of the way. Good to see everyone.